Welcome to the L Plate podcast, where we sit at Jesus' feet until he is formed in us. I am your brother and fellow disciple, Pardon Shakwai. In the next 3 sessions, we will look at one of the most sobering things Jesus ever said. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. That is in Luke chapter 9, verse 23. We will look at what this means to the disciples then, and also what it means to us today. I would like to acknowledge Brother Adonis, who, because of his burden on this subject, he has put this platform together. I have known Adonis for the last about 20 years in the faith, and his life of discipleship is an example of an L plate in action, always growing but never graduating. So in the last few weeks, I've been reflecting deeply on this scripture, and by the grace of God, I'll go on a journey with you on what it says to the disciples, but also more importantly, what it means for each one of us today. So a bit of background to what was happening at the time that Jesus would say these words in the general context. So when Jesus comes to the scene, the Jews were waiting for the Messiah. Even the ones who would deny Jesus eventually, they also were waiting for the Messiah. They just didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah that they've been waiting for. They had a view of where the Messiah would be from, what he would look like, and what he would do even. No wonder Nathanael's response to Philip when he says to him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael responds and says, "Nazareth, can anything good come out from there?" See, Jesus didn't fit his view or expectation. The Jews had been oppressed for a very long time, and they expected a political or military leader to deliver them from Rome. And that was their idea of a Messiah. Now, not even just the Jews in general, but even when you consider people like John the Baptist, after fully witnessing the Father and the Holy Spirit confirm that Jesus was the one on the day that he baptized him, it says, the voice came from heaven and said, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." But at a point later on, when John is arrested, he sends his disciples to ask him and to confirm. And he says, "Are you the one, or shall we wait for another?" Now, there's some speculation that perhaps John had an expectation that the Messiah would do something to help him set free from prison, which was not happening at this time. Or even when you look at the disciples themselves, perhaps you think maybe John wasn't close enough so he could have a skewed view of what the Messiah would do. But the 12 disciples, they asked Jesus when he arose from the dead. Acts chapter 1, verse 6, he says, "Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom of Israel?" They thought, now is the time that he will overthrow the Romans and restore the physical kingdom of Israel. What they didn't realize was the kingdom that Jesus came to establish was a different type of kingdom, not a natural kingdom, but a kingdom of his own, a kingdom of the Father. This is the general context that Jesus is operating in. And it's important as a foundational context because of the conversation that happens in chapter 9. And I think it's important for us to contemplate the question, why did Jesus say these words? Like, what would drive him to say these words at this very moment? Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. This verse is said immediately after Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter correctly responds to this question and says, "You are the Christ, you are the Messiah." And when Jesus confirms this, possibly this would be one of the greatest things for the disciples to hear. And so now, following this confession, Jesus begins to describe what would happen to him, that he would be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. And these people that is mentioning, they are the custodians of the faith till this point. And anyone who wanted to learn about God would have needed to go to them. Now, if these highly regarded people won't accept him, that is bad for advertising for Jesus. And the reason why companies use celebrities today to market their products is because they're trying to influence public opinion by having endorsements from respectable people, endorsements from popular people. I bought some Nikes recently, and when I went to the shop, I remembered when I was trying to choose a shoe and I was looking at one, and I just remembered that Naomi Osaka wore this type of shoe in one of the games, and I love Naomi Osaka's tennis. So for me, because Naomi wears it, it must be good. I didn't need to do my own personal due diligence to check, is it strong, is it firm? All I needed to know was Naomi wore it, so it must be good. Now, to the disciples, if the people who were meant to do due diligence on all things religion, if they were going to reject Jesus, on what other basis would they accept this man? If I was Peter, who is known for his lack of academic training, and I can't vet spiritual things, why would I accept these words from this man who says, if you're following me, deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me? So for Jesus to confirm to his disciples that he was the Messiah probably will cause some thoughts to the disciples. And I was contemplating what this might mean to people like John and James, whom we know that later on they would ask for a special place in the kingdom, which means they had a view of what Jesus had come to establish, in what place they would have in that kingdom. Now, with the understanding of what the Messiah must do or must achieve, you can imagine all those thoughts in their minds. Perhaps they're starting to think, because of our association with Jesus, we will start to enjoy natural power, influence, and authority. Possibly they start to see themselves as rulers and governors over the Messiah's rulership in this present world. And the interesting part is how Jesus responds to this. His first response to Peter saying, "You are the Messiah," he says, "The Son of Man must suffer many things." So immediately he's trying to bring down to Peter that, yes, I'm the Messiah, but I am a Son of Man, and as a man, I am going to suffer many things in this world. And I believe that Jesus here is trying to anchor the disciples in the truth about following him. He is trying to say to them, rid yourselves of any ideas you brought, because if you're to be my disciple, this is how it's going to be, to deny yourself. So in this episode today, I will look at the first part that says, deny yourself. And then in the next one, I'll look at take up your cross. And lastly, I'll look at follow Jesus. So I'll look at what did this mean to the disciples when he says, deny yourself. And by extension, what does this mean to us as well today? So denying self is giving up desires or identity or rights. It is to count your desires unimportant in light of God's desires. And the disciples that Jesus is writing to in this moment, most of them would die as martyrs. They would be killed for their faith. They would be killed on account of Jesus. And this was part of their life of self-denial for the sake of Christ. In Philippians, Paul tells us, chapter 3, verse 7 to 8, "But whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Jesus Christ, my Lord, for whose sake I lost all things. I consider them garbage, that I may gain Christ." So Paul is looking at everything that he held dear before as unimportant. The position that he held, the knowledge that he had, he's considering all that to be a loss, all that to be garbage for the sake of gaining Christ. And so now we ask the question, so what does denying self look like to me? Jesus here is commanding the disciples to deny the evil, self-centered desires of their lives or of their sinful nature. And you may think, oh, but I'm a born again. With which sinful nature are we talking about? Folks, as long as we are on this earth, we will never rid ourselves of this corruptible, sinful nature which desires what is contrary to the Spirit and is hostile to God. And ungodly desires will always be there. They will always be in and around us. And denying ourselves means choosing to draw from the Spirit and turn away from the desires of the flesh that are opposed to Him. Denying myself would mean that I lay down every ambition of mine at Jesus' feet, and I pick up his desires, I pick up his ambitions. He becomes the source of my ambitions. See, most of the natural aspirations of our hearts and the influence of the world around us is to chase whatever makes us feel good. And sometimes these aspirations, they portray the will of God as burdensome or even downright foolishness sometimes. Our desire is always to look out for good for us. But the chief disciple, Jesus Christ himself, who was following after his Father, in doing the will of the Father, he emptied himself and died the painful death on the cross. And we must learn from this example that denying ourselves is following his example and not putting our needs ahead of everything else. And friends, this doesn't come at no cost, because when you are denying yourself, you are letting go of what you naturally want. And there is normally a huge cost to this. And suppose you are a student in an exam and you did not prepare enough. The flesh will tell you to look over your shoulder and steal your neighbor's answers and pass the exam. That's the easy way out. But denying self means I choose integrity. I fail the exam, so, and I can prepare better to pass next time. I choose integrity in that moment. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12 to 13 says, this is, Paul writing to Timothy, he says, anyone who wants to live a godly life in Jesus Christ will be persecuted, while evil men and impostors will go from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. This verse almost sounds like a promise, as in it's meant to happen at some point in your faith journey. If you are going to live a godly life, you will be persecuted. If the world hated Christ, it will hate you. If the world persecuted Christ, it will persecute you. And this persecution may not be directly from people, but indeed from the effects of your choices. Standing up for what you believe in, refusing to follow the sinful practices of this world, it will cost you. It may cost you your friendships, a promotion at work, popularity, income, or even opportunities. That is the cost of following him. That Paul is talking about as a promise that you will be persecuted. And I'll end this episode with this story of two young Moravians whom we are told they lived an example of this denying of self. They lived in Germany, and their names were, I think, Johann Dober and David Nishman. So they hear that in the West Indies, there was a slave master who had about 2,000 to 3,000 African slaves. And he had vowed that no preacher, no clergyman will ever stay on the island. If he's shipwrecked, they would keep him in a separate house until he has to leave, but never to speak to any of them about God. He said, I'm through with all this nonsense. Now, these two young men were so burdened by this. We can't have 3,000 slaves die without ever hearing about Christ. So they decided to set off to this island. And people from their community, they all come and are bidding them farewell. Most of them are crying. Most of them are not approving of their decision. And because they believe they would never return, having freely sold themselves to a lifetime of slavery to this British slave master. So the story goes, when they were departing from the dock, as the ship was slipping away with the tide, and the gap was widening between the dock and the ship, the two young men linked their arms. They raised their hands and shouted, may the lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering. May the lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering. Such a heart, such a self-denial for his glory. And folks, until next time, keep your eyes on Jesus, front and back. Stay at his feet, because disciples do not graduate. May God richly bless you.